today will be we'll start with the general blood flow to the heart. Right, general blood flow to the heart. Then we'll then look at the actual cardiac cycle. Okay, where we'll be discussing about the various terminology like what is diastole, what is systole, what is atrial diastole, what is atrial systole, things like that, and what happens at each and every stage. That is something which we'll discuss. And then the third thing that we'll do is we'll talk about cardiac output. What exactly is cardiac output? Right, and then we'll move on to the conduction system of the heart. Okay, conduction system is basically the heart is basically a pump which is actually contracting and relaxing constantly to pump the blood. So it needs electrical signals. Okay, so it needs constant electrical signals because every activity in our body needs nerve impulse or nerve signals, and in the same way even the heart needs electrical signals for it to contract and relax. Okay, so in the conduction system we'll be seeing about the electrical system of the heart. Okay, electrical system of the heart. Where is the signal actually generated? How is it actually moving, and what is that signal actually doing? These are the things which we'll see. And then once we're done with it, we'll talk about the electrocardiograph. Okay, electrocardiograph. Then the final thing that we'll discuss, if time permits, is regulation of cardiac activity. Okay, what are the factors that actually control the cardiac activity? Right. Okay. So before actually talking about the general blood flow to the heart, we'll quickly talk about, right, very quickly we'll talk about the structure of the heart, because this is just to refresh your memory so that you understand the topic better. Okay, so just to give you a quick recap, so you have superior vena cava coming from the top and the inferior vena cava coming from the bottom, both open into the right atrium. You already know that you have 4-chambered heart. Okay, humans have 4-chambered heart. You have the right atrium, left atrium, right, and then right ventricle and left ventricle. Okay, right. Then what you have to understand here is, into the right atrium, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava gets the blood from lower body parts, right, gets the blood from lower body parts. When I say lower, the parts which are lower than the heart. Okay, and the superior vena cava, the inferior one will get from the bottom, and the superior vena cava will get the blood from the parts, or let me put it this way, upper body parts. Okay, upper body parts. It will get the blood from upper body parts, and both open into the right atrium. Okay, right atrium. Then between the right atrium and the right ventricle, you have the tricuspid valve. Okay, I told you the way to remember this is RAT. Okay, RAT. Right atrium has tricuspid valve. Okay, and that tricuspid valve this is the valve. Okay, that valve is now shown as open. So when it opens, the blood which is there in the atrium will move to the ventricle which is below, the right ventricle which is below, and from the right ventricle, okay, this is about these two, and between the atrium and the ventricle you have the atrioventricular septum. This is the septum, and the only way blood can actually move from the atrium to the ventricle is through the valve, and this valve is the tricuspid valve. In the same way, you have the left ventricle here, sorry, the left atrium here, and into the left atrium you have the pulmonary veins opening. 2 pulmonary veins from each lung. So 2 pulmonary veins from the left lung and the 2 pulmonary veins from the right lung. So you see 2 openings here and 2 openings here. 2 coming from one lung and 2 coming from the other lung. Okay, so all of them open into the left atrium. Okay, and the left atrium is connected to the left ventricle through a bicuspid valve, and the way to remember that is LAB. Bicuspid valve is actually present between left atrium and the left ventricle. Okay, so the blood from here will move into this. Okay, now once the blood is here, what is happening? Okay, how is the blood actually after coming from, you know, the superior vena cava or inferior vena cava into the atrium here, and from the pulmonary veins into the atrium here? So you have two atria. For the right atrium, you are getting the blood from superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, and for the left atrium, you are getting the blood from pulmonary veins. Okay, pulmonary veins which are carrying the blood from the lungs into the left atrium. Okay, now let's see what happens after that. Okay, so you can see here, this is the right atrium which is actually getting the deoxygenated blood. Okay, from the various body parts. The oxygen has already been used up by the various body parts, and you're getting your deoxygenated blood to the right atrium, right? You have your right atrium with the deoxygenated blood, and in the left atrium you are getting the oxygenated blood from the lungs through the, these are your pulmonary veins. Through the pulmonary veins you are getting your oxygenated blood. Now both the atrium has blood. Okay, they are filled with blood. Now the next thing that happens is, okay, through the valves which are already open, the blood will flow, okay, from the right atrium and the left atrium, to the corresponding right and the left ventricles, Okay, so the moment this happens, what happens? Okay, when this happens, automatically the blood starts to accumulate in the ventricles, so the pressure in the ventricles will start to raise. At the same time, when the blood is completely transferred from, in the next stage, when the blood is completely transferred from the atrium into the ventricles, okay, from the atrium into the ventricles, the pressure in the atria will drop. Okay, it's no longer holding the blood, so the pressure in the atrium will drop. However, the pressure in the ventricles will build. Okay, what happens then? When the pressure here builds, they start pushing the blood through the valves. Okay, so you have the semilunar valves here. Okay, semilunar valves. So the one which is actually connected to your right atrium is your pulmonary artery. Okay, which is connected with, which is, you know, which has the pulmonary valve. Okay, pulmonary semilunar valve, and then the left one has the aorta. Okay, so this is the aorta opening. Here you can see this is the aorta opening. So you have another semilunar valve here, which is the aortic valve. Okay, so through these valves open now. Okay, these valves open now, and the blood will start to flow. Okay, so from this the blood will start to flow here, and this is actually going from behind. And through the aorta it is supplied to various parts of the body. So you can see the blood actually moving here, and from behind it is actually moving through the aorta. So these are these are the events which actually occur, okay, when the blood has to move from one chamber to another. The blood will first enter the right and the left atrium. Okay, the valves, okay, through the valves the blood will start to move into the ventricles. Once the blood is actually inside the ventricles, okay, you can see the pressure building, and because of the pressure building, two things happen. Okay, one, the semilunar valves open. At the same time, the valves which were open before, these valves, okay, I'm talking about the tricuspid and the bicuspid valve. Okay, I told you last session I told you that these valves are actually like this. Okay, so they can open in only one direction. They can open like this, but they can't open like this. So the moment pressure builds in the bottom cabin, okay, that's the ventricle, the valves are closed. Okay, here you can see the valves being closed. Okay, the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves are closed, and now the semilunar valves open, and that is how your blood is actually pumped to the lungs. Yeah, the lungs and through the aorta to the various parts of the body. Okay, so that is what happens. Okay, now one important thing that you have to understand here is your heart actually makes two sounds, right? The famous lub and dub, right? So those sounds are generated because of the valves, okay, because of the closure of the valves. Okay, when the valves actually close, that is when this sound is actually generated. So when the blood actually moves from the atrium into the ventricle, when the blood is here, okay, the pressure will start to build here, and these will actually push and the valves actually close. Okay, these valves actually close when the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves, which are present between the right atrium and the left atrium, okay, like right atrium and their corresponding ventricles, okay, between the right atrium and the right ventricle and the left atrium and the left ventricle, you have the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves. When these valves close, you get the sound lub. Okay, the sound which is generated when these valves close, not open. Okay, when these valves close, okay, you get the lub sound. Then when the semilunar valves, particularly when I say semilunar valves, we are talking about the pulmonary valve which is present between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery, and the left ventricle and the aorta. Okay, the aortic valve. So you have your aortic valve, and you have the pulmonary valve. Okay, when these valves close, okay, when they close, when will they close? After the blood is actually pumped out of the ventricles. After the blood is actually pumped out of the ventricles, there is no longer pressure, okay, holding them open, so they simply go into the closed position, and when they actually get back to the closed position, they generate a sound which is your dub. Okay, so the lub dub sounds are because of the closure of the valves. Okay, the lub sound is because of the closure of the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves, which are present between the atrium and the ventricles, the left and the right one. And then the dub sound is because of the closure of the semilunar valves, which is the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve, which are present between the, which are present between the ventricle and the vein, the pulmonary artery and the aortic artery. Okay, so then we look at something. We look at some important terminology here. Yeah. Okay. So you can see here. So we'll actually look at a couple of things here. So we already saw how the blood flow actually happens. Then we are about to talk about the cardiac cycle. Okay, we're talking about cardiac cycle. Now, when we talk about cardiac cycle, okay, there are a few things that actually happen here. Okay, the first thing you can see here is this is called the joint diastole stage. Okay, before actually seeing all this, let me tell you a couple of things. Okay, when your arteries, when your atrium or your ventricles are in the relaxed state, okay, when they are in the relaxed state, we call it diastole. We call it diastole. And when they contract, we call it systole. Okay, so if it is the atrium which is contracting, we call it atrial systole. If it is a ventricle which is contracting, we call it ventricular systole. Okay, so that is how it is. Okay, so I'll tell you a simple way to remember this. You all know red cross. Okay, so just remember this as red cos, not red cross, red cos. Okay, so relaxed state is diastole and contract state is systole. Okay, so relaxed is diastole and contracted state is systole. Okay, now with that knowledge we'll look into this. So when I say joint diastole, the first stage is the joint diastole. Okay, what do we mean by that? Diastole is relaxed state. So when I say joint diastole, we're talking about the relaxed state of both atrium as well as the ventricles. Both are in the relaxed state. Both are in the relaxed state. And you can see the valves are open. Okay, this is the tricuspid valve and this is the bicuspid valve, which are present between the atrium and the ventricles of the left and the right and the left chambers. Okay, so here the blood is actually coming from the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava into the right atrium. Okay, into the right atrium you can actually see the blood coming in. So you have blood here and the valves are already open. Okay, so you can see in the next stage, so that is in the joint diastole stage, you will see that both the atrium as well as the ventricles are relaxed and the valves are open. Okay, then into the next, if you move into the next stage, you see the blood actually filling in, right? The blood is actually filling in. So this blood is coming from into the right atrium, it is coming from the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava, right? And into the left atrium, you are getting your blood from the pulmonary arteries. Okay, pulmonary arteries. Now, once the blood starts to fill in, okay, the blood will start to move into the ventricles as well because the valves are already open. However, the pressure is created on the atrium. Okay, when the blood actually fills, the atrium will now contract. So at this stage, you will actually see atrial systole. Okay, you will actually see atrial systole, that is contraction of the atrium. Okay, as such the blood will flow into the ventricles because the valves are already open. However, because of the atrial contraction, which is nothing but atrial systole, okay, the blood flow increases to almost 30%. Okay, the flow of the blood to the ventricles will increase by 30%. Okay, will increase by 30%. So because of so basically what we are trying to say here is, even without the atrial pressure, the blood is still moving into the ventricles. However, as a result of the pressure or as a result of atrial contraction, then the volume of the blood moving into the ventricles is increased by 30%. Okay, so relatively lesser contractions here. Okay, now the blood has through the valves, through the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves have moved into the ventricles. Okay, have moved into the ventricles. Now at this stage, what happens? The pressure inside the ventricles will increase. The pressure inside the ventricles, because they are filled. Okay, so this causes two events. The blood will actually push. Okay, the blood will actually push, causing the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves to close. Okay, causing the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves to close. At the same time, you have your ventricular. Now, at this stage, you have to understand something. When the ventricles are actually getting the blood, yeah, the atriums, okay, the left and the right atriums are now at the relaxed state. So from the systolic state, they again moved back to. So here at this stage, they are in. This is atrial diastole. Okay, atrial diastole. At the same time, you will actually see this phase, which is ventricular systole. Ventricle is about to contract. Ventricles got the blood, they are about to contract. So when the moment ventricle systole gets over, that is the blood is, so two things, I told you two things will happen. One is they'll push the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves to close. And the second thing is, okay, because of that pressure and because of the contraction of the ventricle, okay, the blood will now start moving from the ventricle into the pulmonary artery and the aorta. So here the semilunar valves open. So you're getting your lub and dub sounds. Okay, you're getting your lub sound after atrial diastole, okay, or in the beginning of your ventricular systole, okay. However, once the blood is pushed out, okay, there's no longer blood, so the semilunar valves which were open here, yeah, at this point they were open, they are coming back to closed position here. Okay, they're coming back to closed position here. So that is what is generating your dub sound. Okay, so once this is done, it's coming back to your joint diastole stage. Okay, joint diastole stage. Now from the ventricular systole stage, once the blood is actually pushed out, you will actually see the ventricular diastole here. Okay, ventricular diastole here. Okay, let me just tell you quickly again. So in the initial stage, which is joint diastole stage, both ventricles and both the atrium and the ventricles, auricles and the ventricles are in the relaxed state. Okay, now blood will start to pump, or blood will start to come back into the atrium from the veins. Okay, here it is the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Here it is the pulmonary veins. Okay, once that happens, the atrium will start to contract. Okay, even before contraction, some of the blood will start to move into the ventricles through the valves which are already open. The blood will start filling up the ventricles. Once the ventricles are full, two events happen. They'll close the two valves, that is the tricuspid and the bicuspid valve, and the moment it starts contracting, the semilunar valves which are present between the pulmonary artery and the aorta will start to open, and this, once the blood is actually pushed because of that contraction from the ventricular diastole, from the ventricular systole stage, you're coming back to ventricular diastole stage. Okay, so just remember this: diastole is relaxation and systole is contraction. Okay, systole is contraction. Okay, so that is your complete cardiac cycle. And you know how many times a heart actually goes through all these steps in a minute? In a minute, it will go through this at least 72 times. Okay, 72 times in a minute. So one complete cardiac cycle in 0.8 seconds. One complete cardiac cycle in 0.8 seconds. Okay, so the entire cardiac cycle will take around 0.8 seconds. Okay, so this is about, so you'll start with joint diastole, then you have atrial systole. Wherever you see systole, that means contraction, and it is followed by atrial diastole. Around the same time, you see the beginning of ventricular systole, and the moment the ventricles push the blood out, you will see the ventricles coming back to the relaxed state, and at some point both of them are in the relaxed state, which we call the joint diastole. Okay, so this is about the cardiac cycle. Okay, so this is about your cardiac cycle, right? We're done with the cardiac cycle. So we have seen joint diastole here, where both are relaxed. Then we talked about atrial diastole, what is happening there. Then atriums are going through contraction, which is atrial systole. Then we saw around the same time, we saw ventricular diastole, sorry, systole. Okay, around the same time. Yeah, I'm sorry. This should be atrial systole, right? First contraction and then relaxation. I'm sorry. So this is diastole. Then you have ventricular contraction. Then you have ventricular diastole. Okay, then coming back to this entire thing will come back again to joint diastole. Okay, so this is about your cardiac cycle, and this entire process will take 0.8 seconds. Okay, so that's the reason why you have a pulse of 72 beats per minute. Okay, so the entire thing is considered as one heartbeat. Okay, the entire cardiac cycle is considered as one heartbeat. Okay, now what is cardiac output? What is cardiac output? All right. So cardiac output basically is, so if you look at this, so we have already seen you have your atrium here, and then you have it's opening into the ventricle. Okay, so and from the ventricle the blood is actually from the ventricle, the blood is which is coming is pumped. So each ventricle pumps 70 ml of blood. Okay, each ventricle pumps 70 ml of blood, okay, per cardiac cycle. In one cardiac cycle, when it actually goes through one cardiac cycle, each ventricle, okay, you have your right ventricle, and then in the same way you have your left ventricle here. Okay, the right ventricle will pump 70 ml of blood and the left ventricle will pump 70 ml of blood, okay, per cardiac cycle. So the volume of blood, okay, pumped by, right, the volume of blood pumped by each ventricle in a cardiac cycle is called the stroke volume. It's called the stroke volume. Okay, the volume of blood pumped by each ventricle in a cardiac cycle. Okay, in one cycle, the volume of blood that is pumped by each ventricle is called the stroke volume. Okay, now you have to understand something like this. Okay, let's say you have actually filled a balloon with water. Okay, you filled a balloon with water. Now, if you open the mouth and apply little pressure, only some water will come out, right? If you apply a lot of pressure, obviously almost all of the water will come out. Okay, so the stroke volume will depend on, you can say, the ventricular contraction. How good is the contraction? If the contraction is too much, then the volume will actually increase. If the contraction is less, the volume will decrease. Okay, because ultimately it is the ventricles that are pumping. The stroke volume is directly related to the volume of blood pumped by the ventricles. So if the ventricles pump more blood, okay, the stroke volume will be more. If the ventricles pump less blood, the stroke volume will be less. And what actually determines whether the ventricles will contract more or less? There are several factors. Okay, there are several factors which actually determine how much a ventricle will contract. Okay, but in a normal healthy human being, the stroke volume is 70 ml. Okay, 70 ml per cardiac cycle. In one cycle, you will actually see an output of 70 ml. Okay, now what is cardiac output? Okay, so that is stroke volume. Then what is cardiac output? Now that you know what is stroke volume, cardiac output is quite simple. Cardiac output is stroke volume. Okay, stroke volume into multiplied by heartbeat, and we already know that heartbeat is 72. Okay, the number of times a heart beats is your cardiac cycle number, okay, in a minute. So heartbeats per minute, right, per minute. So stroke volume, I told you, is around 70 ml, right? So if you calculate, it comes to around 5.04 liters per minute. Okay, so this is what we call the cardiac output. Okay, cardiac output. That means our heart is capable of pumping 5 liters of blood per minute. 5 liters of blood per minute. That's your cardiac output. That's your cardiac output. Let's say if someone has a weak heart, Okay, he has some problems with his heart. Okay, but let's say his stroke volume, for instance, let's say his stroke volume is, let's say his stroke volume is 70. Let's say his stroke volume is normal. Okay, but there's something wrong with his heart. Let's say his heartbeat has gone down, and now let's say it is only 65. Okay, then what happens to the cardiac output? If the heartbeat is reduced, the cardiac output will obviously will reduce. 4.5 liters per minute. And look at it the other way. Okay, let's say the heartbeat is normal, but something wrong with the ventricular, okay, or volume of the blood is less. Okay, then also you will see a decrease in the cardiac output. Okay, you will see decrease in the cardiac output. So cardiac output basically is, if you have to calculate, you can simply say that cardiac output is, if you have to define it, you can say it is volume of blood pumped by each ventricle, okay, per minute. So that's your cardiac output. Okay, so stroke volume is per cardiac cycle how much volume is actually being pumped out. That's your stroke volume. But per minute, how much volume of blood is actually pumped by your pumped by each ventricle is your cardiac output. So this is the definition of your cardiac output. Okay, so that is about cardiac output. Now there are factors which actually influence the cardiac output. Okay, we'll talk about those factors when we talk about the regulation of cardiac activity. Okay, now, so I told you briefly what cardiac output is. Then we'll move to the next topic, which is your conduction system. Okay, conduction system. Conduction system of the heart. Okay, now, so we all know that heart is nothing but a big muscle. Okay, it's entirely made up of muscles, cardiac muscles, right? So this has the ability to pump. That means it has to basically contract and relax. It has to contract and relax. Now, if you know the basics of your how the nerve impulse is transmitted and things like that, how the muscles actually contract the moment it receives the nerve signal, right? So if you're not familiar with it, don't worry, we'll discuss that when we actually talk about the muscular system in the next couple of sessions. Okay, but basically this is what happens. Let me just give you a gist. Okay, whenever you want to move your hand, let's say you want to move your hand, right? So a signal from your brain, okay, a signal from your brain through the nerves, through your neurons to be specific, will reach the muscles of your hand. Will reach the muscles of your hand. Now, how is the signal actually moving? The signal is actually moving, or the signal which you are getting is your nerve impulse. The nerve impulse is actually carried from the brain through the neurons to the muscle, which causes the muscle to contract. And nerve impulse is nothing but electrical signal. Nerve impulse is nothing but electrical signal. Okay, now this electrical signal is generated, okay, this electrical signal is generated because of something called action potential. Okay, don't worry about these terms now. Okay, don't worry about these terms now. We'll discuss them in detail while discussing the mechanism of muscle contraction. Okay, there we'll actually talk about, because this is a topic which is somewhat related to that. We'll discuss that this aspect of you know, the contraction and all under muscular system. Okay, so you have, so just understand this. So for every contraction you need an action potential. Okay, for each and every contraction you need action potential. Now action potential basically has two components. One is depolarization and repolarization. Okay, let me just go back again. Okay, from the bottom we'll start. First, depolarization should happen. If the depolarization happens, action potential is generated. If the action potential is generated, electrical signal is generated. If the electrical signal is generated, basically, which is nothing but your nerve impulse, the nerve impulse will be transmitted to your muscles. In other words, depolarization is the key to contraction. Okay, depolarization is the key to contraction. Depolarization and repolarization are the key to constant contractions and relaxations. Okay, so like I said, don't worry about these terms. Just understand this, that depolarization should happen for the muscles to contract. And this depolarization happens when you actually get impulse. Okay, not impulse, I'm sorry, stimulus. When you get your stimulus, okay, okay, let's say you touched a hot plate. The moment you touch your hot plate, the signal from the tip of your finger is taken to your brain, okay, and the brain says move your finger. So it won't say directly, it will simply pass the electrical signals, and those signals travel through your hand from the brain to the, or from the spinal cord to the hand, and that causes your muscles to contract and you pull out your finger. Okay, so everything happens because of the electrical signal. Okay, and that electrical signal is generated when the action potential is generated, and this action potential is generated when the depolarization happens, and this depolarization happens when you actually touch the hot plate. So that's your stimulus. So if pulling your hand from the hot plate is the response, then touching it, okay, and feeling the heat is your stimulus. That is your stimulus. That stimulus causes depolarization and ultimately causes the contraction of the muscles, because of which you are actually pulling your finger off the hot plate. Okay, so even if you haven't understood any of this, just understand this. For every contraction, you need depolarization, okay, or stimulus. Stimulus will cause depolarization, depolarization will cause contraction. Okay, and your heart is something which is contracting and relaxing constantly. That means it needs constant depolarization. Okay, so but there's no stimulus for the heart. Okay, there's no stimulus as such for the heart. Okay, so how is the heart actually contracting? How is the heart contracting? How is the heart actually contracting? Now, the heart has, okay, a specialized cardiac tissue called the nodal tissue. It has a specialized cardiac tissue called the nodal tissue. Okay, now what is so special about the nodal tissue? The nodal tissue is special because it can contract without, okay, it can not contract, it can generate, okay, action potential. Okay, it can cause contractions. Okay, basically it can cause contractions, generate action potential without external stimuli. You don't need any stimuli. So this is auto excitation. That is the speciality of this particular nodal tissue. And your heart has this nodal tissue spread all over it. Okay, your heart has nodal tissue spread all over it. Okay, so this nodal tissue, right, is the one which is actually generating the action potential required for the excitation or the contractions and relaxations of the heart. Okay, now where exactly is this nodal tissue present? Okay, how is it actually connected? How is it actually causing the contractions? That is what we'll see now. Okay, this nodal tissue is mainly concentrated in two parts. Right? This nodal tissue is mainly concentrated in two parts of the heart. Right. Okay. So in the upper part of your right atrium, okay, in the upper part of your right atrium, you see a patch of the nodal tissue. You see a patch of the nodal tissue, and this patch is what we call the sinoatrial node. This patch is what we call the sinoatrial node, and this is present, this patch, which can get excited without any stimulus. Okay, this is auto excitable. It can generate action potential without the need for external stimuli, So it can get activated and it will simply pass the electrical signals to various parts of the heart. Okay, we'll see how it is actually connected. So this SA node, okay, which is a nodal tissue, okay, you have one SA node. It is basically connected to these tracts. Okay, these are called the internodal pathways or internodal tracts. You can even call them internodal tracts. Okay, internodal tract, you can see this. This is also another internodal tract. This internodal tract is actually connected to your, left atrium. This is actually connected to your left atrium. And this here is called the Bachmann's bundle. Okay, Bachmann's bundle. Okay, the one which is actually the nodal tissue which is actually going here. Okay, the nodal fibers which are actually going here. That's called the Bachmann's bundle. Okay, now just forget about Bachmann's bundle for now. So you have your SA node, okay, sinoatrial node, and this node is connected to another node which is present. Okay, this is your septum. This is your septum between your right atrium and the right ventricle. Okay, so somewhere near atrioventricular septum, that's what we call it. This is your atrioventricular septum. Near that atrioventricular septum, okay, in the right atrium itself, near the atrioventricular septum, you have your another node called the atrioventricular node. Okay, atrioventricular node. Okay, you can see the tracts actually connecting the SA node and the AV node. Okay, now this AV node, okay, this AV node, atrioventricular node, AV node, simply called AV node. This atrioventricular node will now, so you have your septum, right? You have your septum, will now actually pierce through the septum. Okay, will now pierce through the septum, and through the septum it moves to, this is your ventricular septum. Okay, interventricular septum, the septum between two ventricles. It moves through the interventricular septum. Okay, interventricular septum, and then you see the nerve fibers actually extending all the, this is your apex of the heart. This is called the apex of the heart. Will reach the apex of the heart. Okay, so this part is what we call the bundle of His. From the AV node you are getting your bundle of His, right? From the AV node you are getting your bundle of His, and the bundle of His will then separate or split into two branches, the right bundle branch and the left bundle branch. Okay, will split into two branches, right and the left branches, and they then end up forming the, what we call the Purkinje fibers. Purkinje fibers. Okay, and these fibers spread all over your heart ventricles. Okay, they spread all over your heart ventricles. So this is like, this SA node is like the generator. Okay, you can imagine this as a generator. Okay, so if you can say your brain is like your, the substation for your body. for generating all the electrical signals needed for your body. But here you have a generator which can generate its own signal. Okay, it's not dependent on the substation. It can generate its own signal, and it is connected to the various parts of the head. So it can basically generate a signal, and that signal can be transmitted through these fibers to the various parts of the heart. Okay, so if I say that the electrical signal generated by this will cause the contraction of the heart, so the moment this part generates the electrical signal, the signal is transmitted, let's say the signal is transmitted here, then this part will contract. If the signal is transmitted here, okay, this entire thing will contract. Okay, so these are the ones, okay, this entire conduction system is the one which is actually causing your heart to contract and relax. Okay, this entire thing is actually causing your heart contract and relax. So let me tell you again, the signal is generated in your sinoatrial node. Okay, the sinoatrial node is also connected to your, the sinoatrial node is actually present in the right atrium, but is also connected to the left atrium through the Bachmann's bundle. Okay, through the Bachmann's bundle. Okay, so you have your internodal tract here. Okay, and then you have internodal tracts connecting the sinoatrial node to the atrioventricular node. Okay, to the atrioventricular node, and the atrioventricular node will pierce through the atrioventricular septum. Okay, atrioventricular septum, and will move on the surface of the ventricular septum. Okay, so this bundle over here, the moment it pierces through and reaches the interventricular septum, this bundle is what we call bundle of His. And from the bundle of His, you are getting two branches, the right and the left ones, and both are actually ending up in Purkinje fibers. Okay, so this is something which you will have to remember, and this is the way the signal is actually transmitted in a heart. The electrical signal is transmitted in a heart. From the SA node, the signal through internodal tracts or internodal pathways, okay, will move to the AV node, right? And from the AV node, it moves to the bundle of His. Okay, and from the bundle of His, you have two branches. Okay, the right bundle and the left bundle. Okay, and both end up forming Purkinje fibers. And these Purkinje fibers spread all through the right and the left ventricles. So if the signal is generated here, the signal is carried to the atrium as well, to the entire, okay, to the entire ventricles because of the Purkinje fibers, and the signal can basically cause contraction. So when the signal is generated here, the signal is first transmitted here. Okay, the atriums will contract, and then signal will start slowly moving through the AV node into the bundle of His, into the right and the left bundle, and into the Purkinje fibers. And when the signal is finally here, the entire thing will start to contract. Okay, the entire thing will start to contract. So these electrical signals which are generated here, 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 okay, the electrical signals are actually moving. It is generated here, it is moving here, and from here it is moving into the ventricles. These can be tracked. These electrical signals can be tracked. Okay, we know how the electrical signals are, what is the strength of these electrical signals, by using a machine called electrocardiogram. Okay, so these, all the electrical inputs of the heart, all the electrical signals of the heart can be monitored using an instrument called electrocardiogram. Okay, so that instrument will tell you how much electrical signal is generated in your SA node, okay, how much moved through the internodal tracts to AV node. Okay, at each stage you are actually getting information. Okay, you are getting information, because when the signal is here, you won't see, okay, you won't see much of a difference. But when the signal is actually spreading, the spreading of the signal will actually cause the atrium to contract. And if the signal is not good enough, then the contraction will not happen. Okay, so just by looking at the strength of the signal, we can tell how well your heart is functioning. If the signal is not good, then your heart will not function properly. Okay, because entire thing is actually managed by this SA node. Okay, so if let's say there's some obstruction here and the signal is actually not moving into the lower parts, then this contraction is affected. So you won't see any electrical signals corresponding to this part. Okay, so all these electrical signals can be monitored using your ECG, and a graph generated based on the electrical inputs of the various events happening in the heart. Okay, so all the events that happened. So what happened? The signal started here, it started moving, immediately it started moving to the left atrium as well, and simultaneously it starts moving to the AV node, and from the AV node through the bundle of His, it starts moving into the ventricles, which causes the ventricles to contract. So initially it started contraction of the auricles, and then it moved to the lower parts and started to contract. So at any point, if there is obstruction in the electrical signal, okay, you will know that there is something wrong with the heart. And if you graph each and every electrical signal, you will be able to say whether your heart is in a good condition or if it's going bad. Okay, so that is what your electrocardiograph is. Electrocardiograph will tell you the electrical inputs generated in the heart, okay, during the various events of contractions and relaxations. Okay, so let's see what happens there. Okay, let's see the events first, and then we'll talk about the actual graph. Okay, let's see the events first. So you see the purple spot here, that's your SA node. Okay, that's your SA node. Okay, the SA node is actually generating, it is auto excitable. Okay, it doesn't need the help of any external stimuli. It can get excited on its own. So it gets excited first. Okay, the moment it gets excited through the Bachmann's bundle and through the internodal pathways, you actually see that it is actually exciting even the left atrium. Okay, you can see the signal here. Wherever you see purple, you see the excitation. Okay, excitation is another word for depolarization, which basically causes the contraction. Okay, now, so the electrical signal from here will move here, and it is actually spreading all over the arteries. At this point, the atriums, okay, the entire atriums, at this point, the atrium will start to contract. At this point, the atrium will start to contract. And you see the signal at the same time, it is actually slowly moving to the lower parts. You see the purple thing, it stopped here. Okay, it takes some time for the signal to move from AV node into the bundle of His. Okay, it has to pass through the atrioventricular septum. Okay, it has to pierce through the atrioventricular septum. So it takes some time for the signal to reach from AV node into the bundle of His. The moment it reaches the bundle of His, you will see the signal immediately moving to the apex of the heart. Okay, it immediately moves to the apex of the heart. I hope you can actually see the purple color here. Okay, so it immediately moves to the apex of the heart. And from the apex of the heart, through the Purkinje fibers, which are spread all over the ventricles, the signal will start to move, and this will basically cause the contraction of the ventricles. The ventricles contraction will start here, but at this point, you will see the complete contraction of the ventricles. Okay, so that is how the electrical signal is transmitted from the SA node all the way to the Purkinje fibers, which are spread all over your ventricles. Okay, so this is the pathway. From SA node through the internodal pathways, it is reaching the AV node, and from the AV node through the AV bundle, okay, which is nothing but your bundle of His. Okay, another word is AV bundle. Okay, through the bundle of His is moving into the bundle branches, which is the right and the left branches, and from the left branches it is moving into the Purkinje fibers. Okay, it is moving into the Purkinje fibers. And like I said before, all these electrical signals, whether it is this signal or this signal or this signal which is spreading all over the arteries, I'm sorry, I keep saying arteries, all over the atrium, right? Or this signal which is spreading all over the ventricle causing it to contract can be monitored, and we use the ECG for doing that. Okay, so in ECG what basically people do is you have 3 leads or 12 lead. Okay, they connect you with the leads, okay, basically to pick up the signal, and you usually have 3 leads. A basic one will have 3 leads. Now the most advanced one has 12 leads, basically connected to your chest, hand, and then legs. Okay, so this will actually pick up the information of the electrical signals from the electrical events happening in the heart. That will give you an information about the electrical events happening in the heart. Okay, so let's see how it goes. So in the ECG, okay, let me just tell you. Yeah, in the ECG, you will actually see lines like this. The electrocardiogram will look something like this, right? So each peak and each baseline will correspond to change in the electrical. So if I say this peak is very big, you see this peak is very big, that means the electrical signal here is maximum. Okay, the electrical signal here is maximum. So wherever you see peak, okay, here the electrical signal is maximum. Here also the electrical signal is maximum. So I'll tell you simply. Here the electrical signal is maximum. This is where your atriums are contracting. Here the electrical signal is maximum. This is where your ventricles are contracting. Okay, so we'll see step by step how this graph is actually generated, which part of the graph is related to which electrical signal. Okay, that's what we're about to see. Which part of the graph is actually related to which electrical event. Okay. So we're about to see the electrical events of the cardiac cycle. Okay. So the first thing is your SA node, which is auto-excitable, generated the signal, right? That signal is actually spreading. Okay, that signal is actually spreading. And when it is spreading, initially when the SA node gets excited, you don't see a peak. You see a flat line. Okay, you see a flat line. Okay, the signal generated is very small. When the SA node gets excited, the signal generated is very small. Okay. Then the signal starts to spread. Okay, the signal starts to spread. Okay, so that is when you actually see a peak forming. Okay, that is when you actually see a peak forming. I hope you can actually see this. Okay, that peak you start with P. Okay, that peak is your P. The electrocardiogram ECG will start with P and end with T. You have all the letters in between. Okay, P, Q, R, S, T. Okay, so the first peak is your P. Now what is this P actually representation of? The P is actually representation of atrial depolarization. That is, this is when the atriums will get complete electrical signal and it is ready to contract, or it starts to contract. The atrial depolarization will lead to its contraction. Okay, the electrical signal is, in crude words, the electrical signal is completely spread all over the atriums. Okay, and this causes them to contract. So you see the purple thing all over. So this peak, the P peak here, represents the atrial depolarization. Okay, atrial depolarization. So it is going up, and when it is actually coming back, the atria will contract. Okay, there is no signal here anymore. They contract and the signal is gone. Okay, the signal is gone. Okay, basically the signal is gone. Now what is moving? The signal from there is actually moving through from the AV node. It is actually moving through the bundle of hairs to the apex of the heart. To the apex of the heart. Okay, so here also you won't see a strong electrical signal. That's the reason why you don't see any peak. Okay, the line is still, this went up when the atria started to contract, which is corresponding to P, which is atrial depolarization. Okay, atrial depolarization, excitation of the atrium. Then what happened? Then they came back to the normal. Okay, and then you see a peak actually building up. Now what happens? The signal is actually spreading all over the heart. The signal is spreading all over the heart. So you see the peak actually raising here. Okay, and this peak over here corresponds to your ventricular depolarization. So the ventricles are completely depolarized at this stage, and this stage will cause them to contract. Okay, when they contract, the signal will be gone, and you see again the graph is going down again. The signal is going down again. Okay, it's flat again. And then you have ventricular repolarization. When the ventricles are coming back to the normal state, from the depolarized state to the repolarization state, okay, don't worry about the terminology, okay, because you will understand the terminology when you actually know what is depolarization and repolarization. That I'll explain when we are talking about muscle contraction. Okay, so when it is actually coming back, it generates some signal which is corresponding to your T. Okay, so the three things that you have to remember here are: the P peak corresponds to atrial depolarization, QRS corresponds to the ventricular depolarization, okay, and the T peak actually corresponds to the ventricular repolarization. All the other lines which are more or less flat are, there's no strong electrical signal at that point. Okay, there's no strong electrical signal at that point. Okay, so let us see the graph in detail here. Okay, the signal first starts with the SA node, but the signal is weak at the SA node, so you see a flat line here. Okay, then what is happening? The signal from the SA node is moving into the left, the entire left atrium as well as the entire right atrium, okay, where it is actually generated. In the right atrium it is generated, and it starts to spread in the right atrium, and through the internodal pathways and Backum bundle, okay, it reaches the left atrium as well, and it causes the depolarization of the atrium. Okay, atrial depolarization is happening. At the same time, even your AV node is getting depolarized. Okay, AV node is getting, the signal is being transmitted to the AV node as well. So you actually see the atrial depolarization, which is represented by P wave. Okay, the P wave corresponds to atrial depolarization. So if I say that the peak is like this, instead of being like this, if the peak is like this, that means your depolarization of the atria is not happening properly. If the depolarization of the atria is not happening properly, that means they are not contracting properly. So there's something wrong with your heart. Just by looking at this graph, you will be able to tell whether your heart is functioning properly or not. Okay, so this a normal standard graph for a healthy human being. This is how it should actually look. So you are actually tracking the voltage, the electrical input. Okay, so the electrical input is being monitored here. Okay, and with time, okay, with time, so both will tell you if it is taking longer. Let's say if this, so you can see here from 0.2 to this P wave is between 0.2 to, let's say, 0.4, for instance, not exactly 0.4, but you can say 0.35, just giving an example. Okay, somewhere at this point, it's here somewhere at this point. Okay, so this point, let's say 0.35. So this region, if it is actually being extended to 0.4, that means the depolarization taking a lot of time. Again, there's something wrong with your heart. Okay, so these graphs will actually tell you to what extent it's getting depolarized, and if it is getting depolarized in the correct amount of time or not. Okay, in the correct amount of time or not. If anything is deviating from the normal graph, that means there is something wrong with your heart. Okay, that means there's something wrong with your heart. Okay, now, so after atrial depolarization, you will see a flat line again. You will see a flat line, and this actually corresponds to the signal moving through the bundle of his, right, and the Purkinje fiber. It just start moving, so it's starting to move to the the right and the left bundles. Okay, you won't see a strong signal there. Okay, but the moment it moves and enters the Purkinje fibers, okay, to the apex and through the Purkinje fibers, you will see again the repolarization of the ventricles. Okay, the repolarization of the ventricles. Now, once it gets depolarization of the ventricles, okay, once the ventricle gets depolarized, it is coming back to normal again, and you will actually see again a repolarization signal. Now, you may ask, what happened to the atrial repolarization signal? Okay, you have depolarization signal, but you won't see any atrial, even if it is small, you won't actually see an atrial repolarization signal. That's missing. What happened to that signal? That signal is missing because the atrial repolarization signal is very small when compared to this peak. So it's like this. If you are standing right next to, let's say, a 1000-watt bulb, a strong bulb, and you switch on your mobile lamp or mobile flashlight, obviously you won't see the difference. Okay, so the intensity of the other light is so much that you won't be able to actually make out if your mobile is on, even the flashlight of your mobile is even on or not. Okay, it doesn't make any difference. So that the same thing happens. The signal right next to is so strong that this signal is not captured. This signal is not captured. Okay, so that is what happens. So you won't see a peak corresponding to atrial repolarization. You will see the peak P corresponding to atrial depolarization, then QRS peak corresponding to ventricular depolarization. Okay, and you will see the T wave corresponding to ventricular repolarization. The ventricle which got depolarized, which got the electrical signal contracted, right? And then it is coming back to its original state to start another depolarization again. Okay, the entire thing will start again. You see? So you see the entire thing again starting. So it is depolarization again. Then you will see a short segment. Then you will actually see the QRS wave again, which is ventricular depolarization, and then a short segment again, ST segment. Then you will again see the ventricular repolarization. So this is how your ECG works. Okay, so this is about how the ECG actually gives you important information about the basic functioning of your heart. Whether it is functioning properly or not, you will get to know a lot of information just by looking at your ECG. Okay, so yeah, so the topic that electrocardiogram, if you have to define it, it's basically a graphical representation right. It's a graphical representation of electrical events of the electrical activity of the heart during a cardiac cycle. That's your ECG. Okay, graphical representation of the electrical activity. How is the electrical activity? Because the electrical activity will finally determine the contractions and the relaxations. Okay, so if the electrical activity is normal, you will see a normal graph. If the electrical activity is abnormal, then you won't see a normal graph. Your graph will be abnormal, which basically indicates that there's something wrong with either the electrical signal itself or the contractions and the relaxations, because they are ultimately dependent on the conduction system. Okay, now moving on to the last topic, which is regulation of cardiac activity. Like I said, the cardiac activity the cardiac activity is, like I said, is controlled by the SA node, right? Because of which the SA node is called the pacemaker of the heart. Okay, it's called the pacemaker of the heart because it is auto-excitable, also auto-excitable. It can excite on its own without, when I say auto-excitable, no external stimuli needed. No external stimuli needed. Auto-excitable. And because of this reason, we call our heart myogenic heart. Myogenic heart. Now, does it mean that your heart is not controlled by any other part of your body? Okay, or specifically, is the nervous system controlling your heart or not? Okay, the answer is yes. The heart is actually controlled by, okay, it can work on its own, okay, because it has the SA node which is auto-excitable. In addition to that, your heart is under the control of autonomic nervous system. Okay, specifically the two components of autonomic nervous system, which is sympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems, both have control over heart. Okay, now the sympathetic nerves, okay, the sympathetic nerves will actually the sympathetic nerves control the heartbeat. Okay, they actually increase the heartbeat, different situations. Okay, and you have your parasympathetic nerves. Let me tell you the location, exact location where they are present. Yeah, just give me a second. Yeah. So here, yeah. So the parasympathetic nerves, yeah. So this is under the control of your so basically medulla oblongata of the medulla oblongata can actually control this, right? The autonomic nervous medulla oblongata, which is a part of your autonomic nervous system. Okay, and the signals through the sympathetic nerve can actually increase the heartbeat, right? Sympathetic nerves increase the heartbeat, and they even control the, yeah, this is something which strength of the ventricular contraction. They control the strength of the ventricular contraction. Okay, they have the ability to increase the heartbeat and control the strength of the ventricular contraction. So we know that ventricular contraction will if it contracts more, your stroke volume will increase. Okay, stroke volume will increase. Again, heartbeat, if the heartbeat is increasing, stroke volume will, if the heartbeat is increasing, obviously, because your cardiac output is stroke volume multiplied by heartbeat. So if this increases or this increases, then your cardiac output is going to increase. Okay, so both the factors will actually increase the cardiac output. Both the factors will increase the cardiac output. Okay, now if you talk about the parasympathetic nervous system, they decrease the heartbeat. They decrease the heartbeat, and because of that reason, okay, and they do this by actually they control the conduction of action potential. Okay, conduction of action potential, that is conduction of electrical signal. Okay, they control the conduction of the electrical signal, thereby reducing the heartbeat. And obviously, if the heartbeat is reduced, the cardiac output will also go down. The cardiac output will also go down. Okay, so these are two components of the autonomic nervous system which can actually control the heart. In it, like I said, SI node is good to control the heart independently. But in addition to that, there are certain aspects which actually control your heart. Okay, and in addition to these, there are hormones, okay, adrenal medullary hormones like your epinephrine and norepinephrine, which can also control your heartbeat. Okay, how well your heart, the number of beats per minute can also be controlled by those hormones which are released from the adrenal medulla. Okay, so this is about your the various aspects of the cardiac cycle and about your ECG, where we're talking about let me just quickly summarize so that so if you're talking about cardiac cycle, okay, it starts with joint diastole where both are relaxed, both atrium are relaxed. Then the atrium will start to contract, like I said before, red cos. Relaxed state is diastole, contracted state is systole. So the blood starts to fill up and then the atrial systole will happen, right? Contraction will happen. Then this is followed by atrial diastole, right? When the atrial diastole is still happening, you will see the ventricular systole, right? And once the ventricular systole, the contraction of the ventricles is over, the blood is emptied, you will finally see the ventricular diastole. Okay, and the entire thing is what we call the cardiac cycle. It's coming back to this, and this approximately takes 0.8 seconds. Then we talked about stroke volume, the volume of blood pumped by ventricle per cardiac cycle, which is 70 ml. And we talked about cardiac output, which is stroke volume multiplied by the heartbeats per minute. Okay, then ECG. Okay, I'll give you the simple highlights. The P wave corresponds to atrial depolarization. Okay, basically this is what leads to atrial contractions. Okay, then QRS wave corresponds to ventricular depolarization. Then you have T wave, which corresponds to ventricular repolarization. Okay, now you won't see atrial repolarization. You won't see this because the QRS signal is too strong that it actually masks the atrial repolarization. The instrument will not be able to pick up that signal, which is quite small when compared to the QRS signal, which is very close to it. Okay, very close to it. The atrial repolarization and ventricular depolarization are so close. Okay, the ventricular depolarization are so close that the signal of atrial repolarization is missed, is completely masked, okay, by the QRS signal. Okay, so yeah, so some of you actually asked about how the parasympathetic nerve signals affect the working of the heart. Towards the end, I have already explained. It basically controls the electrical signal conduction, thereby reducing the heartbeat. Okay, and anything that reduces the heartbeat or the ventricular contraction will directly affect the cardiac output, so the cardiac output will go down. Okay, if the heartbeat is increasing, cardiac output will increase. If the stroke volume is increasing, the cardiac output will go up, right? So that's it for today's session, and when we actually meet for the next session, we'll be talking about the transport in plants, where we'll start with the means of transport and how things are actually transported to various parts of the plants and to the cells. Okay, all those things we'll discuss in the next session. So that's all for today. Hope you understood the lecture today. Do subscribe our channel on YouTube, and follow us on other social platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and just try our app. It's really good. That's it for today. Bye.